The static never truly paused in the city, a relentless, omnipresent hum that had become the soundtrack of my existence. But tonight, beneath the usual drone, there was something different, a subtle shift, a tremor in the white noise that prickled my skin and tugged at the edges of my sanity. I sat hunched in my cramped studio, the walls cluttered with tangled cables, battered speakers, and oscilloscopes flickering with indecipherable graphs. Rain tapped rhythmically against the grimy window, and beyond, the city writhed under another furious electrical storm. The air was thick with ozone and charged ions, but inside, the real storm was brewing in the speakers. As I adjusted the tuner, static warped, folding in on itself like a living thing. Then came the voices, faint, fractured, ethereal. Not the usual garbled bursts or mechanical crackle, but something altogether more unsettling. They whispered just beneath the threshold of comprehension, like a half-remembered dream or a secret whispered in the dark. I leaned in, breath caught, heart racing. "Help, trapped. Can you hear us?" The words slipped through the static, fragile and desperate. I rewound the recording again and again, isolating the strands of sound, trying to piece together meaning from the chaos. But the voices twisted and fragmented, sometimes merging with bursts of static, sometimes dissolving into silence. It was as if the signal itself was haunted, carrying imprints of pain and loss, echoes of something beyond the physical world. The more I listened, the more the boundaries between reality and hallucination blurred. The studio lights flickered, shadows danced on the walls, and the static seemed to pulse with a sinister rhythm, almost alive. At times, I swore I could see shapes flickering in the periphery, glimmers of movement where none should be. My skin prickled as if touched by unseen fingers, and the hum in my ears grew louder, a relentless drone pressing in on my mind. I was losing my grip. Mara came to see me the next day, her sharp eyes scanning the chaotic tangle of equipment and notes sprawled across my desk. "Elias," she said gently, but with steel beneath her concern, "this obsession, it's eating you. You're not the only one hearing things. You're seeing things too." I bristled at her words. She didn't understand. This wasn't madness. It was revelation. "The static," I said, voice low and intense. "It's more than noise. It's alive. It's a veil, a membrane between worlds. I'm hearing there, please. They're trapped, Mara." She shook her head, frustration and worry etched into her features. "Or maybe you're chasing ghosts in your mind. You need to hold on, Elias, before this thing drags you under." Her words stung, but I couldn't pull away. The recordings beckoned me back, each playback revealing new layers of ghostly imprints, faint harmonics beneath the static, like the fingerprints of trapped souls. I ran spectral analyses, adjusted filters, and tweaked my equipment to reveal what had been hidden. One night, as the city convulsed under the storm's electric wrath, I sat alone, headphones wrapped tight around my ears. The voices surged up, clearer than ever, overlapping in a cacophony of sorrow and urgency. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me, feeling their pain seep into my bones. "We are lost. We need you. Please." The room dimmed, and the static thickened, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. Shadows stretched and writhed in the corners of my vision. I fought to stay anchored, to remember who I was. This was no longer just a signal. It was a haunting, a siren call from beyond the veil. And I was answering. The low hum of fluorescent lights, coupled with the distant growl of the ever-present storm, was the soundtrack to Dr. Kalen Sato's cramped laboratory. Elias Vaughn stepped cautiously over a maze of cables and scattered equipment, his eyes scanning the tangled mess with a mixture of awe and unease. The air smelled faintly of ozone and solder, an electric anticipation hanging heavy in the room. "Here," Sato said, motioning to a bank of electromagnetic sensors perched precariously on the edge of a cluttered workbench. His thin fingers adjusted a dial, eliciting a soft whine that vibrated through the metal chassis. These devices, when synchronized with the storm's electromagnetic pulses, can detect fluctuations not just in our physical environment, but in the spaces between. Elias's brow furrowed. Spaces between. Sato's pale eyes glinted behind round glasses. Liminal spaces. Zones where realities overlap, created and sustained by the chaotic energy of these electrical storms. Your hidden frequency, the one you've been chasing, it's not just noise. It's a signal emanating from one of these thresholds. The revelation settled over Elias like a shockwave. He had suspected there was something more to the voices buried beneath the static, but to hear it framed in scientific terms gave a new weight to his obsession. "Show me," Elias urged. Over the next several hours, the two men bent over oscilloscopes and frequency analyzers, piecing together a tentative map of the city's electromagnetic topology. Sato explained how the storms acted as both veil and gateway, their erratic pulses sculpting invisible corridors between dimensions. Elias absorbed every word, his mind racing to envision how he might push his equipment beyond its usual parameters. Back in his studio, a cramped sanctuary cluttered with audio gear and walls plastered with spectral charts and waveform printouts, he began the painstaking process of modification. He replaced standard receivers with custom-built amplifiers capable of filtering out the overwhelming static. He integrated phase shift modulators and feedback loops to coax the liminal signals into sharper focus. Night after night, the city's neon glow flickered through rain-speckled windows as Elias immersed himself in the distorted symphony. The deeper he tuned, the more the voices emerged, snatches of desperate pleas, fragmented memories, and mournful whispers that seemed to seep from a place both alien and achingly familiar. Yet with every breakthrough came a creeping unease. The boundary between signal and mind began to blur. The static seemed to pulse with a life of its own, invading his senses even when the equipment was off. Mara Lin's visits became more frequent and urgent. Her sharp eyes scanned the chaos of cables and screens, and her tone was firm yet gentle. "Elias, you're chasing shadows in a storm that's already swallowing you whole," she warned one evening, her voice cutting through the hum of machines. "You can't lose yourself over voices that might just be echoes of your own mind." He looked up, exhaustion lining his face. "But what if they're real, Mara? What if this is the only chance to reach them?" She sighed, placing a steady hand on his arm. "Then we find a way to do it without losing you." Despite her caution, Elias knew he was teetering on the edge. The recordings showed new layers of complexity, patterns within patterns, bursts of clarity amidst the chaos. Dr. Sato's theories gave him hope that the liminal space could be navigated, even controlled. But with every attempt, the storm outside seemed to grow fiercer, as if the city itself resisted his intrusion. Static crackled louder in his headphones, sometimes erupting into spectral voices that whispered directly to him, blurring the line between the trapped realm and his own fragile psyche. One night, as lightning fractured the sky, Elias sat bathed in the blue glow of his monitors. The modified receiver thrummed in his hands, tuned precisely to the frequency Sato had identified. The static exploded into a chorus of voices, some pleading, others warning, all laden with raw emotion. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, feeling the pull of a threshold just beyond reach. Suddenly, A sharp crack jolted him back. The equipment flickered, screens flashing erratically. For a heartbeat, the storm outside and the storm within him converged. Ilias's fingers trembled over the controls, desperate to hold the fragile connection. A whispered echo floated through the headphones, crossed the threshold. His breath caught. The choice lay before him to push deeper into the unknown or retreat to safety. The city's electrical storm raged on, an unyielding symphony of chaos and possibility. And Elias Vaughn, caught between worlds, prepared to cross the boundaries that had long defined his existence. But as the hum of static swelled around him, a question lingered. Was what awaited beyond the threshold salvation or oblivion? The night stretched on, thick with electricity and unspoken promises, as Elias calibrated his device for the next plunge into the liminal depths, unaware that with each step he took, the silent authority's shadowed gaze drew ever nearer. The thunder rumbled low and relentless outside the grimy windows of my studio, a ceaseless drumbeat beneath the city's electrical storms. The static had grown from a subtle hiss to an overwhelming roar, drowning out the familiar hum of my equipment. Flickering screens cast pale blue light over a mess of wires and tangled cables. It felt like the air itself was charged, heavy with something unseen, something hostile. It started with a subtle shift in the interference patterns, a jagged pulse that sliced through the usual white noise. The signal jammers had found me. Their presence was no longer a distant threat, but a physical assault on every frequency I touched. Each attempt to tune in to the hidden broadcast was met with a harsh, grating distortion that clawed at my sanity. I watched the needles on my monitors twitch erratically, the signals twisting and snapping like a living thing fighting to be heard. The voices, the fragile, desperate whispers I had come to know, were being drowned beneath an ocean of mechanical shrieks and static crashes. It was as if the city itself, or whatever force bent to suppress the truth, was squeezing the air from my lungs. A sudden, sharp knock shattered the tense silence. My heart leaped into my throat. The door rattled under repeated pounding. Outside, muffled voices exchanged clipped commands, accompanied by the unmistakable whir of surveillance drones hovering just beyond the cracked glass. The silent authority had arrived. I scrambled to shut down my equipment, desperate to erase any trace of my work from their prying eyes and ears. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows deepening as the storm's fury battered the city streets. I could hear the agent's footsteps, cautious but unyielding, moving closer. Elias, Mara's voice sliced through the chaos as she appeared at the back exit, breath coming in sharp bursts. Get out, they're coming for you. I didn't hesitate. Grabbing my portable recorder and a few essential tools, I slipped through the cramped exit, the cold rain immediately soaking into my clothes. The city's neon glow was distorted by the sheets of rain, the usual cacophony of hums and buzzes, replaced by a suffocating silence punctuated only by distant thunder. Mara caught up with me in a narrow alley, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice steady despite the storm. "They're already jamming signals across the district." I nodded, the weight of the moment settling heavily on my shoulders. Every step away from my studio felt like leaving a part of myself behind, my sanctuary, my battleground, my prison. "They won't stop," I said, voice hoarse. "They want to erase everything." Mara's gaze hardened. "Then we'll have to be smarter. We find new ways. The static isn't just noise, it's the veil they fear. We can use it against them." Her determination was a lifeline, a flicker of light in the storm's endless night. Yet beneath it all, I could feel the creeping tendrils of paranoia wrapping tighter around my mind. The line between reality and hallucination blurred like the rain-slicked streets beneath our feet. As we vanished into the city's shadows, the oppressive static buzzed in my ears, a reminder that the fight was far from over. The silent authority had struck hard, but their grip was not absolute. Somewhere beyond the storm, the voices waited, and I would find a way to hear them again. But the question that haunted every step was clear: how long before the storm swallowed us all? The rain hammered down relentlessly, each drop a tiny drumbeat in a symphony of chaos. Above, lightning cracked the sky open, illuminating the city in jagged, fleeting bursts. In the distance, sirens wailed a dissonant chorus to the unfolding battle for truth and connection. I clenched the recorder tighter, its cold metal a fragile talisman against the encroaching silence. Mara's figure moved ahead with purpose, a beacon of defiance in the neon-soaked night. Together, we melted into the labyrinth of alleys and forgotten passageways, hunted yet unbroken. The static might have been their weapon, but it was also our messenger's signal of resistance, flickering stubbornly through the storm. And I was listening. The flickering glow of the monitors cast elongated shadows across the cramped corners of my studio, where the hum of static now felt less like background noise and more like a living presence. The voices at once fragile and insistent pierced through the white noise in splintered fragments. They were not words I could fully grasp, yet their emotional resonance was unmistakable. Desperation, longing, silent cries for salvation. Each night blurred into the next, as sleep became a tenuous refuge. When I did drift into dreams, the city transformed into a fractured tableau of shimmering lights and pulsing storms. Ghostly silhouettes emerged from behind veils of static, their ethereal forms reaching toward me with mute sorrow. I woke, gasping, the spectral impressions lingering in the hollowed spaces of my mind. Mara found me pacing the dim hallway outside my apartment one evening, my eyes wild, hands trembling as I replayed the latest recordings. "Elias," she said firmly, her sharp gaze cutting through the haze of my obsession, "you need to ground yourself. These voices, they're breaking through your mind, not just your equipment." Her words were a tether, but the pull of the broadcasts was relentless. I confided in Dr. Kalon Sato, whose pale frame hunched over his consoles amid a labyrinth of wires and screens. His voice was clinical, yet tinged with unease as he explained the electromagnetic anomalies we were chasing. "These liminal spaces," he said, "are as much a trap for the mind as they are for the signals. You must guard your sanity as fiercely as your equipment." Despite the warnings, I plunged deeper. The broadcasts now carried stories, fragmented narratives of entrapment and silent suffering from a realm parallel yet hauntingly close. The signals seeped into my waking hours, twisting perception, making shadows dance with unseen faces. The city's oppressive static was no longer mere noise. It was a veil hiding a tortured truth. As the boundary between what I heard and what I believed thinned, I wrestled with my own mind. Was I losing grip on reality, or was reality itself bending under the storm's influence? Mara's steady presence anchored me, even as my paranoia grew. Dr. Sato's scientific detachment offered frameworks, but no comfort. Each distorted transmission was a shard of a greater puzzle, beckoning me toward a truth that terrified and compelled me in equal measure. The voices were more than echoes. They were reaching out, yearning for rescue from a prison woven of storms and static, a prison I was now determined to breach. But with every step forward, the shadows lengthened. The silent authorities' interference intensified, their cold, mechanical presence a reminder that some truths were meant to remain buried. As I navigated the labyrinth of signals and sanity, I realized that the greatest battle was not just to save the lost voices, but to preserve the fragile thread of my own mind. The static whispered on, carrying secrets I could no longer ignore, pulling me toward a precipice where the fragments of reality might shatter completely or coalesce into something new. I stood at the edge, listening, waiting for the next transmission, the next plea, the next glimpse into the unknown. And I knew, deep down, that turning back was no longer an option. The storm outside roared in celebration or warning, I could not tell which. But the voices were waiting, and I had to answer. The rain had just begun to taper off when I slipped through the narrow side alley. The familiar crackle of static in the air mingling with the distant rumble of thunder still rolling across the city skyline. Neon signs flickered erratically above the puddle-speckled pavement, casting fractured glows that danced with the shadows clinging to the walls. I was late. Mara had warned me to be cautious, but curiosity gnawed at my thoughts. An itch I couldn't scratch until I met the man who knew the city's undercurrents better than anyone, Jux. The alley was a maze of forgotten passages, and I found him leaning against a rusted fire escape ladder, his leather jacket soaked and clinging to his wiry frame. A cap pulled low obscured most of his face, but his eyes were sharp, darting, always measuring. "You, Elias." Jox's voice was low, edged with suspicion. "I've been expecting you, yeah?" I answered, trying to steady my breath. "You said you had information about the tech they're using, the silent authorities' gear." He nodded slowly, glancing over his shoulder before pulling me deeper into the maze of backstreets. "They've got their fingers everywhere. Signal jammers, drones, surveillance rigs buried in the walls and sky. Not just to watch, but to silence." We ducked beneath a flickering neon sign advertising a long-closed bar, the electric hum blending with the ever-present static that seemed to pulse beneath the city's skin. Mara joined us a few steps behind, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow. "This place," Jox whispered, "is just the tip. The authorities' grip runs deep, hiding in places most people don't dare to look." Our path led us to the city's subterranean networker, tangled web of tunnels and forgotten service corridors where the city's heartbeat slowed and the noise faded to a low throb. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and ozone, and the distant drip of water echoed like a metronome for our hurried steps. Mara's practical urban wear blended with the dim surroundings as she pulled out a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay close," she murmured. At one point, we passed a cluster of graffiti cryptic symbols overlaid with hastily scrawled warnings. It was a clandestine language of rebellion and fear, the city's silent screams etched in paint. Jox led us to a hidden alcove where a dusty workbench sprawled beneath a flickering overhead bulb. On it lay an array of devices: signal, jammers, transmitters, and surveillance equipment. Abandoned, but still ominously alive, with faint blinking lights. I ran a trembling hand over a device shaped like a small box with antennae protruding like spindly legs. The sheer scale of the silent authorities' technological reach chilled me. This was more than surveillance. This was control, censorship, a chokehold on any possibility of connection beyond the static. "They want to keep the voices buried," Jox said grimly. "Anything that threatens their order gets snuffed out." Mara's gaze met mine, a silent understanding passing between us. We weren't just chasing whispers anymore. We were tangling with a force that would stop at nothing. Back out in the wet streets, the city seemed to pulse with renewed menace. I clutched the crude map Jox had sketched, a chaotic web of safe houses, dead zones, and the locations of known authority installations. The static in the air seemed louder here, a living presence pressing in from every direction. "This is just the beginning," Mara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "We need to prepare." I nodded, the weight of what lay ahead settling deep in my chest. Somewhere beneath the electrical storms and the unending hum of static, the truth waited hidden, fragile and dangerous. As we parted ways that night, the city's shadows grew longer. The storm clouds thickened, and the line between safety and peril blurred like the signals I chased. I knew that every step we took into the underworld of this city brought us closer to the heart of the mystery and to the watchful eyes of the silent authority. But I had to keep going, because the voices weren't just noise. They were cries for rescue, and I was the only one listening. The next days were a blur of whispered meetings and cautious exploration. Jox became an indispensable guide, leading me and Mara through forgotten passages and hidden alcoves where the city's pulse beat beneath the surface. Each step revealed layers of a secret infrastructure designed to suppress and manipulate. One evening, as the city's neon glow flickered through rain-streaked windows, Mara and I examined the devices Jox had procured. We found tampered receivers, hacked transmitters, and signal scramblers designed to jam frequencies like the ones I'd detected. The sophistication was staggering. This wasn't a ragtag operation, but a well-funded, deeply embedded system. "They've been at this for years," Mara said, her fingers tracing the circuitry on a jammer, suppressing everything that threatens their narrative. I felt the familiar itch behind my eyes, the relentless urge to decode, to break through the veil. But the threat was no longer abstract. The silent authority's presence was a living shadow, stalking every corner of the city and our very minds. Our nights grew longer and more perilous. Surveillance drones buzzed overhead, their mechanical eyes probing for any sign of dissent. Agent Crow's shadow loomed closer, a constant reminder that our rebellion was as much psychological as it was physical. Yet, amidst the danger, the voices from the hidden frequency grew clearer, their pleas more desperate. They beckoned me deeper into the labyrinth of static and shadows, a siren call I could no longer resist. The city's underbelly had revealed its secrets, but the true battle was only beginning. Between the flickering neon lights and the ever-present hum of electrical storms, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't alone. And whatever lay ahead, I had to face it, for the voices depended on it. As the rain began once more to fall softly over the cracked pavement, I readied myself to plunge further into the urban shadows, into the heart of the storm, where reality fractured and salvation waited just beyond the static. The streets were a tangle of wet reflections and muted sounds, each step echoing with the weight of what I'd learned. Mara's voice cut through the haze as we planned our next move, the city's oppressive atmosphere pressing close. "We need to find the nexus," she said, eyes sharp and unwavering, "where the signals converge, where the boundary thins." I nodded, the lines between hope and fear blurring like the static that haunted my every thought. The silent authority was watching, waiting, but so was the truth, waiting to be uncovered beneath the urban shadows. And I was listening.